On today's episode of the Full Subjects podcast, we're going to be talking about the 5 things in the BC housing market that nobody is talking about right now. As always, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute any legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. It's not intended to cause or induce breach of any existing agency agreement. Cole, take it away.
All right, guys. 5 things about the BC housing market nobody's talking about. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I love it nonetheless. I feel like some people may be talking about some of these things, Austin, but we are certainly going to be talking.
Yeah, we may have talked about some of these things too before. But anyway, let's do it.
All right, so we got 5. No spoilers. We're going to go one at a time here. So number 1, the mortgage renewal wave, which is actually technically already started, could quietly reshape the market. That's number 1 here. So hundreds of thousands of Canadian homeowners took mortgages during the ultra low rate period of 2020 to 2022. So most of those people were taking 5-year mortgages, which means last year we saw a pretty big increase in renewals year over year. This year is going to be likely the biggest because 2021 was a massive year for real estate. And next year there will also be some because 2022 is also strong. But this being the big year. And funny enough, Austin and I just recorded another episode, which we talked about some of this stuff. But at that time, many buyers were locking in at rates of, say, 1.5%, 2%. And now we're looking at rates of more than double that in most cases. So around, let's say, high 3s, low 4s. So around double that, which, I mean, that's a significant increase. So we could see payments going up as much as 30 to 60% for some of these people. Now, there is mitigating factors that you can use here in order to help reduce that payment, like extending that amortization, refinancing your mortgage. But it also may lead to some people not being forced to sell, but being like, you know what, maybe now is a good time to sell. So Austin, I'll let you speak to that a little bit. What's your take on that? And if that is the case, let's assume that is true. How do you see that impacting the market?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing I think about with this, and I think it would also need some context of like what kind of buyer was purchasing during that time, and give me some time to kind of explain that. If you're a first-time home buyer buying in 2021, you're probably just thinking like, oh, well, you know, this is the rate, this is my payments. Maybe you're not thinking about it. You're just thinking of getting into the housing market. And that makes sense. You know, if you are maybe on your second or third home, or maybe a more experienced, that sounds bad, but bear with me. I'm not trying to offend anybody here. But let's say you've purchased a place before. Maybe you've had a mortgage or 2 or 3, and you see what used to be your 3.5% to 4% rate, and now all of a sudden you're getting a 1.5% or 2% rate. There's probably some sort of understanding that this is the exception, not the rule, right? This is, you know, a handful of years where I'm going to have a very favorable rate and understand that when I go to renew in the future, my mortgage will be going up because, you know, banking on a 1.5% mortgage or a 2% mortgage for 25 or 30 years is probably pretty unrealistic, to say the least. So, you know, some people in those scenarios would probably be saying, hey, like, this is going to be a handful of years where it's good, but I have an understanding that my payment's going up. And obviously they would have underwent the stress test to make sure that they could afford a mortgage at a higher rate during that time. But with that being said, if it was your first place and now all of a sudden your payment goes up by 30 or 40%, that's going to be a pretty big shock if you know, you're not used to seeing what a normal mortgage rate cycle or a normal payment would have been. With that as well, because of the stress test and depending on if you purchase at the very top of your budget or not, your payment going up by 30%, knowing that it would probably go up in some capacity, is one thing. But we've talked about inflation multiple times on the show. We've talked about the economy. We've talked about the cost of living and all of those different buckets. So, you know, your mortgage payment going up by 30%, and then maybe you add in a car payment, and every time you go to the grocery store, it being more expensive. Like, all of those things start to add up, which is where people feel the squeeze, and it feels problematic.
100%, 100%. And it can, like, it ultimately could lead to some people making a choice to sell their home, to maybe to downsize so that they can take on a smaller mortgage. And Austin, maybe speak a little bit to how that could impact the market if that is the case. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but how would that play into the current market with more inventory potentially coming on the market for those reasons?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. You're definitely seeing that in the market right now. So
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So I mean, last thing here before we jump into number two is overall living costs for homeowners could increase. And that's really what this is like the overall cost for people could increase. We've seen other things increase, not just mortgages. Austin and I've talked about how strata fees have increased in the past. Insurance costs have gone up. Property taxes, surprise, surprise, tend to go up year over year. All these things are also increasing. So your overall costs to own a home have likely increased. And this is just one more of those things, and not to mention things outside of living costs. Like it is still a living cost, but we're talking about food prices, gas prices, all these other things have also gone up. This doesn't necessarily help. This is just another cost that adds on. And maybe your income hasn't increased at the amount that is able to keep up with all those extra costs. So this is something that is really important, and there is going to be lots of people coming up for renewal this year. Always happy to help those people, of course, but the big thing here is it'll be interesting to see what happens if we see extra inventory because of that, or if we see things kind of just remain the same and people are able to manage this big wave of renewals and dealing with these higher interest rates. Or what's the impact later on? That's the alternative as well. So what happens a couple years down the road, because people are like, I can manage it now, but then if things get worse, ultimately it could make a problem later. So anything else, Austin, before we jump into number two here?
no, let's talk about the price of land and how that is really making housing in BC expensive.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, a lot of people I think invade or kind of blame investors or construction costs, but I think one of the things that's very valuable here is land scarcity, and also the price of that, and that's because of geographically you're constrained, mountains, ocean, agricultural land reserve. Like there's only certain places that you can move or build, but also because of the lower mainland and the amount of people that like to live here, because again you are surrounded by mountains and oceans and all of those great things, that also inflates and makes more expensive land value, and oftentimes it can represent 50 to 70% of a home's price.
100%. Yeah. I mean, you look at BC assessment that came out not too long ago, and you look at, okay, what's the land value versus what's the house value? Um, and that's absolutely the case. Like land value is very valuable. There's lots of places where it's more than, yeah, it's significantly more than the home value is the land. Like, sorry, a larger portion of the overall assessed value is because of the land. And that's just case in point. Like the land is very valuable here. But this is all to say that even if construction does become cheaper, land costs still remain high. That's something that is a constraint. We can't drive that value down necessarily, barring anything dramatic in terms of a complete crash in the market. But I have a hard time believing that would happen in this geographical area because of the scarcity that we have. It's hard to imagine that the land would lose its value because, as Austin said, people want to live in these areas where they have mountains, they have oceans, and they have access to all of these things within an hour's drive for most people, right? And that's something that a lot of people desire, and I don't blame them. I've grown up here my whole life, and so has Austin, and I don't know, in some cases I think I take it for granted how much access we have to these things, but
Totally.
it's something that's really you realize it when you move. Like I moved away for a little bit of time, and you realize how much you miss what you have, even if you don't always utilize what's available. So, yeah,
Yeah, I remember this is totally random and sidetrack here, but I remember I was doing like a hike. It was Joffrey Lakes, one of the ones in Whistler,
yep,
and just walking by and hearing different languages and different accents. And I was like, oh, people go out of their way to come here because it's so cool.
yeah.
You
This
know
is
what I
not
mean?
just
Like,
locals.
yeah, this is not just locals. Like people go out of their way to live here because of the reputation and everything. So yeah, anyway, side story there. Fraser Valley I think one of the other big talking points here that people aren't necessarily realizing is how much growth there is in the Fraser Valley. So your Surreys, your Langleys, even your Abbotsfords, South Surrey, Cloverdale, obviously the SkyTrain coming out, but because a lot of people are being priced out of Vancouver, they are moving farther out east. And when you look at cost of living compared to in town, your Surreys, your Langleys, your Abbotsford are attracting buyers. There's been a ton of infrastructure investments, like we talked about, transits supporting growth, even just other things too, like community centers, rec centers, like all of that stuff, more schools, there's just tons of building and tons of investing in the community going on out this way, and because of that, buyers are gaining more space and ultimately more affordability as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, those markets, as Austin said, are growing. And overall, you're going to see the values of homes in those markets continue to grow over the longer term. Obviously, we've seen values come down in the shorter term, but the longer trend will continue to show that the value of property in those areas will trend up, especially as they expand and they offer more amenities to people. And as Austin said, they build communities. There's now large communities that people are want to be a part of. And I mean, there's other things too, Austin. Like think about, I mean, there's professional hockey teams out in the valley. There's like junior hockey teams have moved out to the valley. I think there's other sports. There's a basketball team that plays out in Langley. There's lots
Yep.
of and a soccer team too. Like there's a lot of things that have moved out that way, and that's very attractive as well. Like you don't have to drive into the city to go and see a professional or an amateur sport. They're right in your hometown now. And you're going to continue to see that as population growth continues and people want to live in these areas because like I said before, like even if you're in Langley, you're an hour away from the ocean. Like you can get to the mountains in some cases in an hour as well. I mean, traffic dependent, of course. But ultimately, like these things are options, and people want to be able to access these things and still live in places where they have some space and they're not in necessarily a condo. They can live in a townhome, or maybe depending on which area we're talking about, they can afford a detached home, right? These are all things that are going to be continue to be valuable. And as Austin already said, transit expansion is a big part of what's going to make these areas even more accessible. Being able to go from downtown Langley all the way to downtown Vancouver and not having to step on I don't even think you have to step on a bus, or a vehicle of any kind. You can walk out your door, step on a train and get all the way there and then all the way back. That's huge for a lot of people. That's
Yeah.
connecting now major cities, right? So I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, no, for sure. One of the other things that I don't think people are talking about enough is how strata costs are shifting and
Mm.
how much they've increased. So, insurance premiums are probably one of the biggest things that stratas are going to be paying for as part of their budget. And especially in condo buildings, they've surged. For context of this too, like once there is a claim in a building as well. So let's say a unit floods and affects a couple other units, and then there's a claim, like that gets a little bit more expensive to insure in the same way that, if you were in a car accident, you're deemed, and it's your fault, you're deemed as a higher risk person, and it's going to cost you more money to get insurance for your car. Um, because of that, again, strata fees are going up by percentage points each month. Older buildings are facing rising maintenance costs as well. Your early 90s builds, you're getting into ages where, if roof isn't done, it should be done. Parking membrane, windows, plumbing, decks, like all of those major work things start to add up. And that can be problematic, whether you're looking at levies or really high strata fees to avoid some of those levies. Special assessments, I'm seeing those reach the 10s, the 12s, the 15s, the $20,000 mark sometimes, to pay for, depending on what work needs to be done and if it's multiple things that they are working on. And you have to really dissect those strata documents and the depreciation reports and the strata minutes closely to understand what you are buying
Mm.
when you are buying it.
Yeah, and you have to be a little bit predictive, I guess, in the sense that, okay, here's here's the information I have available to me. There's things to look at, Austin. So what are some key things that you would say to people that they want to notice when it comes to strategy documents? Things I can think of are the roof. When was the roof replaced? How much money does the strata have available in their contingency fund to cover costs that are expected and maybe are not expected? That's probably two I can think of, but what are some other things that you might want to point out in that case?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like strata documents can be a beast. Like a lot of
Yeah,
times, when clients are writing on strata properties, sometimes those documents can be like 400 pages plus long. Because that's going to include typically your Form B, which is like your information about the unit, your strata's insurance, your strata's budget, the depreciation reports, 2 years worth of minutes, AGM reports, electrical engineering reports, your roof reports, depreciation reports, any SGMs if there was any, if there's any indemnity agreements for your unit, if I don't want to break down and define each one of these right now because I'll be here for 24 hours, but there's a ton of documents that you need to read through. The biggest thing when I'm looking at stratas, like at first glance, is what's the age? What are the types of things that come up at that age? What are the potential components of the home of that build age? So as an example, this isn't strata. If you're going into a 30s or 40s or 50s house, you might have to worry about asbestos, as opposed to, if you're looking at a 90s build, what you're probably going to have to look for or be conscious of, poly B or copper plumbing. As opposed to if you go into something early 2000s, you're getting up on that 25-year mark. Has the roof been done?
right.
Window, there's so many things. There's windows, there's parking membrane, there's elevators, there's electrical, there's so many things that obviously go into the construction of a building. Again, I don't want to be here for 24 hours, but based off of age, you have a general idea of what's in the range of things to be worried about, and then also things that you probably should be inquiring on to see if it's been done already. Because if it hasn't, it's coming quick.
Yeah, and this is all to say that these costs are going up, as we talked about, condo insurance, strata costs, but there's ways to mitigate some of the risk for yourself by being diligent and making sure that you're aware of things that could come up and then making your decision based on that information, because special assessments can happen, but it's not impossible to kind of be aware of the fact that they may happen based on the information that you have. Now, they can still happen regardless, but ultimately you can get ahead of it a little bit and try to figure out, hey, there might be something coming here. Am I prepared for that if I need to? And more importantly, am I willing to take on that potential risk for this place? So just some
I think
things to consider there.
if I can add something on here, it really
Yeah,
depends on who is buying that property. So like if
right.
you're some of the conversations that I have with my first time home buyers, as an example, is, is it going to be more beneficial for you potentially to spend maybe a little bit more money and get something a little bit newer, knowing that you might be able to skirt by some major upgrades that need to be done? Because yeah, you might be paying 10 or 15 or 25 grand, or purchase price might be a little bit higher, and you might have some certainty that you won't have to fork out 5-10 grand for a levy, as opposed to, if you're downsizing, as an example, and you're selling a $1.2 million house and buying a $500,000 condo. Nobody wants to be throwing money away to pay for levies, but if you can factor in the fact that work needs to be done into your purchase price of what you have coming, and that money's going to be available to you to pay, that is a drastically different conversation to
Yes.
have, as opposed to like, wow, I just got hit with this levy. How am I going to pay for this? And I don't mean to laugh and make light of it, but these are the conversations that you need to be having, and understanding what you're buying with a strata.
100% situation based, and that's on Austin and myself to help with those conversations and make sure you understand some of the potential risks involved with that. So last but not least, guys, number 5 here, development delays are quietly limiting the supply. So that's number 5. Houses are still getting built. It's not that houses aren't getting built, but development timelines remain slow. You're having developers that are obviously struggling financially because they have developments in place or they've started building developments. They're having a hard time selling those units. So they're not enticed to build more. There's a lot of different factors at play here. We've seen, as Austin and I spoke about in a recent episode about the BC budget, certain things that are likely going to, specifically PST, that's going to cause potential increases in some things as it comes to the services that are going to be, that PST is going to be applying to. So all these things play to development costs and the fact that we might see more delays or more projects not being built. And the long-term effect of this is what, Austin? What is the long-term effect of this?
The long-term effect of housing delays is going to be that we're going to come to a day where we don't have enough supply now, but if they're not starting this now at the time that we do need it, in a couple of years when the market shifts and we start to see prices inflate, we're going to be years behind of starting these projects. And the pendulum's just going to flip the other way.
100%. People are going to say, well, no, there's tons of supply right now. We're inventory overload. And yeah, there is right now. Absolutely, there is right now. But we know from looking in the past that housing supply was not growing at the rate we needed it to. Now, population growth has slowed, obviously, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to hit a point where, again, demand is beyond supply and we're going to have a problem with not having enough homes. And what will happen at that time is, it's anyone's best guess, but I think it's pretty clear that it's going to cause, again, an issue, and we're not going to have enough homes to buy, and how the market reacts to that will depend on some factors. But we've seen that already happen, so you can kind of guess what's going to happen in that case. But yeah, that's a big one. Like, obviously developers are hurting right now, and we're seeing inventory sit on the market, but we're also seeing, in some cases, red tape being taken down, but we're also seeing extra red tape being put up in some cases. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on there, Austin, or should we wrap it up?
No, we'll wrap it up. This one a little bit quicker than most of our other episodes, but great conversation. As always, guys, if you found this podcast useful, thank you for listening, but also feel free to share it with a friend, family member. Feel free to tag us in social. We always love seeing that as well. And of course, subscribe if you're not. That way you get notified as soon as we drop an episode, and leave us a 5-star review. We do appreciate it. But signing off, I'm Austin.
And I'm Cole.
And this was the Full Subjects Podcast.